The Clocktower Garden was never locked. Until the morning, I remembered who stole my future. The first time I died, everyone told the story wrong. They said I was too proud, too stubborn, too obsessed with winning. But the truth was much quieter. The morning my future disappeared began with a single flower. And when I opened my eyes for a second life, the very first thing I saw was that same flower blooming beneath the Academy clock tower. Only this time, I already knew who had planted the lie. Morning sunlight poured across the pastel stone pathways of Moon Petal Academy, painting every tower in shades of lavender, cream, and pale gold. Ivy climbed graceful arches between buildings, and colorful paper lanterns drifted gently overhead despite there being no breeze at all. The Academy looked less like a school and more like the kind of place children dreamed about before they learned adults could be cruel. Students hurried toward the central courtyard with books tucked beneath their arms and steaming cups of berry tea balanced in careful paws. Some laughed. Some rehearsed formulas under their breath. Some pretended not to notice the enormous examination banners hanging from every balcony. Everything looked exactly as it had before. Exactly. Every tiny detail. The fountain shaped like sleeping kittens. The fluttering white ribbons tied around the examination pavilion. The distant chiming of a silver clock tower. Even the old gardener humming softly while trimming moon lilies beside the east path. Nothing had changed. Except me. My name is Elara Ashbrook. I am a final year student at Moon Petal Academy, and I already remember how today ends. In my first life, I believed kindness was something people protected. I thought hard work spoke louder than popularity. I believed rules existed because everyone intended to follow them. Those beliefs died long before I did. The Academy's most beautiful place wasn't the Grand Library or the Crystal Observatory. It was the Clocktower Garden, a peaceful courtyard hidden behind flowering hedges where only one student each examination week could study in complete silence. Winning the reservation wasn't easy. Students entered a lottery months in advance. Professors supervised the drawing. The reservation couldn't be bought, traded, or inherited. Whoever won had earned it fairly. This year, I won. When my name was announced, the entire assembly applauded politely. Some students even congratulated me. One of them hugged me. That cat would become the reason my future disappeared. Elara! A cheerful voice floated across the courtyard. I didn't have to turn around. I already knew who it belonged to. Maribel Wren. She was impossible to ignore. A graceful cream-colored long-haired cat with elegant curls tied behind her ears using pale blue ribbons. Teachers adored her. Students trusted her. She volunteered at every charity event. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She smiled as though the entire world existed to become brighter simply because she walked through it. In my first life, I thought she was my closest friend. Now I knew better. She hurried toward me, carrying 2 cups of lavender milk tea. I brought your favorite. Her smile was perfect. Exactly as I remembered. I accepted the drink anyway. Not because I trusted her. Because I wanted her to believe I still did. You look nervous, she said. Big exam today. I suppose. You'll do wonderfully. She rested one paw gently on my shoulder. You deserve that garden more than anyone. There it was. The sentence. Exactly the same words. Word for word. My heart remained perfectly calm. The first time she said it, I felt grateful. Now, it sounded like someone complimenting a bird while quietly measuring the size of its cage. Around us, Moon Petal Academy awakened completely. Anthropomorphic cats of every color crossed marble bridges, carrying pastel backpacks, decorated with embroidered stars and tiny bells. Groups compared revision notes. Others debated formulas. Nearby, several younger students released glowing paper butterflies as good luck charms. Everything looked warm, gentle, safe, which made deception easier. Cruel places rarely announced themselves. The Academy clock chimed 7. Exactly 7. Not 7:01. Not 6:59. 7. I stared at its polished silver hands. In my first life, I never questioned the clock. That mistake cost everything. The Clocktower Garden sat beneath the tallest building on campus. White roses climbed its stone walls. Cherry blossoms drifted across polished benches. A tiny stream curved beneath an arched bridge before disappearing beneath flowering hedges. Birdsong echoed gently through flowering vines. It felt peaceful enough to erase anxiety. That was why everyone wanted it. Not because of superstition. Because silence is precious when the rest of the Academy has forgotten how to whisper. Professor Hazel greeted me beside the wrought iron gate. A dignified elderly gray cat wearing emerald academic robes. Miss Ashbrook. He smiled warmly. Congratulations once again. Thank you, Professor. He unlocked the ornate gate. Remember, he handed me the brass reservation key. Examination candidates must complete registration in the Crystal Hall before 9 sharp. I remember. He blinked. You've memorized the handbook. I've read it many times. Excellent. He chuckled. I wish every student did. So did I. Inside the garden, morning dew shimmered like scattered diamonds across pale pink flowers. A single marble table stood beneath an ancient willow tree. One chair, one desk lamp, one bookshelf, One peaceful morning, the exact place where my first future died, I unpacked slowly. Books, notes, ink pens, admission letter, identification crystal, everything arranged with quiet precision. In my previous life, I had been nervous. Today, I was waiting. At exactly 7:22, there came a gentle knock against the garden gate. 3 taps. Soft, polite, just like before. I walked toward the entrance. Maribel stood outside. She looked distressed. Her emerald eyes shimmered with tears. "I'm so sorry." Her voice trembled beautifully. "I know this is your study time. What happened?" "My little cousin was taken to the infirmary." She wiped her eyes. "I only need somewhere quiet to send a message to my family." She lowered her ears. "Just 5 minutes." "Only 5 minutes." Exactly the same words. The first time, I opened the gate immediately. Today, I simply looked at her. Behind the sadness, behind the trembling voice, behind the perfectly timed tears, I saw calculation. Not panic. Planning. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "The rules don't allow visitors." She blinked. Only once. It lasted less than a heartbeat. Most people would never have noticed. I remembered because I had watched that expression haunt my dreams. "It'll only take a moment." "I believe you." I smiled kindly. "But the answer is still no." She laughed softly. Not offended. Merely surprised. "I thought you'd understand." "I do." I rested one paw against the gate. "I also understand examinations only happen once." Silence stretched between us. For the first time, Maribel stopped acting. Only for a second. Her eyes became cold, measuring, searching. Then warmth returned instantly. "As always," she smiled sweetly. "You work so hard. So do you. I hope today goes well." "You too." She turned gracefully and walked away. No argument, no pleading, no scene, which meant she already had another plan. And this time, I intended to discover what it was before it destroyed my future again. Maribel disappeared beyond the flowering hedge without looking back. I didn't follow. In my first life, I had watched her leave with relief, believing I had helped a frightened friend. 12 minutes later, she returned with half the senior class. Today, I closed the gate, locked it, and quietly sat back down beneath the willow tree. The silence returned. Almost. The academy always sounded different during examination week. No music drifted from the arts building. The sports field stood empty. Even the birds seemed to sing more softly, as though they understood every student carried a future in their satchel. I opened my notebook. Instead of studying, I waited. Exactly 9 minutes later. Voices. Not loud. Not yet. Several students approached together. I recognized every one of them before they rounded the hedge. Felix Rowan. Tall. Well-spoken. Captain of the debate society. Hazel Fern. Top mathematics student. Always smiling. Always watching. Juniper Moss. President of the Student Council's volunteer committee. And Maribel. Still wearing that gentle expression that convinced the world she could never hurt anyone. Felix knocked first. "Elara." I stood but stayed several steps from the gate. "Good morning." He smiled. "We just wanted to speak with you." "About the garden." I nodded. "I thought so." Juniper stepped closer. "We've been talking." "That sounds productive." She laughed politely. "You know the examination has everyone stressed." "It does." Hazel folded her paws neatly. "Several students are struggling to find a quiet place." "I know. The library is overcrowded." "I noticed. The music building has repairs." "Yes." Felix spread his paws. "So, there it was. The word that began everything. Would you consider sharing the Clocktower Garden?" In my first life, I apologized. I explained that academy rules prohibited visitors. They accused me of caring more about comfort than classmates. Someone cried. Someone raised their voice. Someone accidentally knocked over my study materials. Within minutes, no one remembered how the argument started, only that somehow, I had become the villain. This time, I smiled. "I'd love to." For cats blinked. Maribel's ears twitched. "But," I continued, "the handbook says only the reservation holder may enter." Felix frowned. "We're sure exceptions exist." "I read every page." I reached into my bag. I even highlighted them. I held up the handbook. Page 73. Section 12. Reservation access. No additional candidates permitted during examination preparation. Violation results in immediate cancellation. Hazel frowned. "I've never read that." "I know." Maribel stepped forward with another sympathetic smile. "Rules are important." She paused. "But surely compassion matters too." "It absolutely does." I nodded. "Which is why I won't risk getting all of us disqualified." Silence. Felix looked uncertain. Juniper glanced toward Maribel. Nobody argued. Because I hadn't refused. I'd simply agreed. With the academy, Maribel recovered quickly. Perhaps we should ask academic affairs. I think that's a wonderful idea. I smiled. Professor Hazel unlocked the gate himself. He's probably still nearby. The words landed like pebbles dropped into perfectly still water. Maribel hesitated, only for a moment. Then she laughed. Oh, he must be busy. Possibly. We shouldn't trouble him. I wouldn't mind. I took one step toward the gate. I can call him. No. The word escaped before she caught it. Everyone looked at her. Her smile returned immediately. I mean, she laughed. He has enough responsibilities already. That's thoughtful. Nobody moved. The conversation had lost its shape. There was no selfish student refusing to share. No dramatic confrontation. No audience gathering. The script had changed. And Maribel hated improvisation. Eventually Felix sighed. I suppose we'll figure something else out. I'm sure you will. They began walking away. Only Maribel lingered. She met my eyes through the iron gate. You've changed. I've grown. Over one summer. Sometimes that's enough. She searched my face. Looking. Comparing. Trying to understand why I no longer fit the version of me she'd memorized. Then she smiled again. Good luck today. You too. She left. The garden fell silent once more. I waited another minute before closing my notebook. Then another. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing happened. Interesting. In my first life, chaos arrived before 8. Today, nothing. Which meant the Clocktower Garden had never been the true objective. It had only been bait. A breeze carried cherry blossom petals across the stone path. One landed on my admission letter. I picked it up. Something underneath caught my attention. A faint silver stamp. Academic registration required. Crystal Hall. Before 9 a.m. No exceptions. The wording hadn't changed. Yet suddenly, I remembered something. Not from today. From after I died. Memory is strange. When people remember trauma, they often recall the loud moments. The shouting. The accusations. The tears. But after death, I remembered silence. Specifically, the silence after I missed registration. While I sat outside the examination hall, devastated, a maintenance cat had walked past carrying a stack of unopened envelopes. He'd muttered something. Something I ignored because I was crying. Now, his words returned. They're all still waiting in the West Courtyard. West Courtyard, not the garden. My heartbeat slowed. In my first life, after the argument, nobody went directly to registration. They gathered somewhere else first. Why? I packed my books, every movement calm, deliberate. I locked the garden exactly as Professor Hazel instructed. Then instead of walking toward the grand marble avenue, I took the smallest path through the botanical conservatory. Very few students used it. It wound between pastel flower houses, tiny ponds, and climbing roses before emerging beside the old greenhouse. The shortcut saved nearly 6 minutes. Another thing I'd learned too late. Halfway there, I heard voices, hidden behind a tall lavender hedge. I stopped, not because I wanted to eavesdrop, because one voice belonged to Maribel. Everyone stays together. Another student answered, but registration opens soon. We have time. Her voice remained calm, confident. The administration always delays. A nervous laugh followed. What about the handbook? Relax. I've already spoken with someone. Someone asked, are you sure? I'm positive. They'll process our entire class together. Someone sighed with relief. Another student asked, what about Elara? Silence. Then Maribel answered, she'll come eventually. And if she doesn't, a pause. Another smile I could hear without seeing. Then she'll look selfish for abandoning everyone. Every hair along my tail stood up. There it was. Not an accident. Not panic. Not misunderstanding. Planning. Carefully. Patiently. Exactly as before. Except this time, I had heard it with my own ears. I didn't move. The conversation continued. We should wait until she leaves the garden. We all go together. It'll look more responsible. Someone laughed. Another said, Maribel always knows how these things work. She answered softly, I just understand people. No, you understand control. Footsteps approached. I slipped behind the greenhouse wall, just before the group rounded the corner. Nearly 20 senior students followed Maribel, laughing, talking, completely relaxed. None of them realized they were walking away from the only deadline that mattered. I watched until they disappeared toward the West Courtyard. Then I looked up. The clock tower bell chimed. 8. Only 40 minutes remained before registration closed. In my first life, this was the moment I became trapped trying to convince everyone else to hurry. This time, I wasn't going to waste a single second chasing people who had already chosen whom to trust. I adjusted the strap of my satchel, took one steady breath, and turned toward the Crystal Hall. Behind me, laughter echoed from the West Courtyard. Ahead of me, the Academy's silver registration doors stood open beneath the morning sun. For the first time in 2 lives, I walked toward my future instead of the crowd. The Crystal Hall stood at the highest point of Moonpetal Academy. Built from pale ivory stone with soaring stained glass windows and soft shades of peach, lavender, mint and sky blue, it looked less like an examination building and more like a cathedral dedicated to knowledge. Sunlight spilled through the colored glass, painting ribbons of pastel light across the polished marble floor. For the first time in 2 lives, there was no crowd, no shouting, no panic, only quiet footsteps and the gentle scratching of pens as staff completed paperwork. I had arrived exactly as the academy intended. A silver-furred administrator looked up from the registration desk. "Good morning." I handed over my admission crystal. "Good morning." She smiled. "You're one of our earliest candidates. I prefer not to rush. A wise habit." She placed the crystal into a scanner shaped like an open flower. Soft blue light surrounded it. A pleasant chime echoed through the hall. Identity confirmed. Another staff member approached carrying a wooden tray. "Devices, please." I placed everything inside. My communication crystal, my notebook tablet, even my tiny pocket watch. Each item was sealed inside a transparent pouch with my candidate number attached. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening. Yet my paws trembled ever so slightly. In my first life, I never reached this desk. I had spent months imagining what registration looked like, wondering if the staff had been kind, wondering if the hall smelled of polished wood or fresh parchment, wondering whether my name would have appeared on the great display board. Today, I finally knew, and somehow, reality felt gentler than imagination. "Miss Ashbrook." The administrator smiled kindly. "Everything all right?" I realized I'd been staring at the registration badge in my paws. "Yes. You look emotional." "I suppose." I laughed softly. "I've been looking forward to today for a very long time." She nodded without asking another question. Sometimes strangers offer the greatest kindness simply by accepting an answer without demanding the story behind it. After registration came biometric confirmation, then signature verification, then examination seating. Each station took less than 2 minutes. Simple, orderly, predictable. The academy handbook hadn't exaggerated. The process existed, so candidates could focus entirely on the examination itself. Not crowds, not confusion, not rumors. At 8:31, a cheerful tone rang through the Crystal Hall. My name appeared on the enormous display suspended above the entrance. Elara Ashbrook. Registered. Cleared. Hall C. Seat 18. The green lettering glowed softly. I couldn't stop looking at it. In another life, I had watched other names appear while mine remained missing. Now, mine shone near the top. It felt strangely unreal. Candidates who completed registration waited inside a peaceful lounge overlooking the academy gardens. Soft armchairs lined enormous windows. Tea and water were available on polished wooden tables. No phones. No notes. Just quiet anticipation. I chose a seat beside the window. From here, I could see almost the entire central campus, the Clocktower Garden, the library, the West Courtyard, and a gathering of students beneath the flowering maple trees. Maribel stood in the middle, exactly where I'd heard her say everyone should wait. She looked perfectly composed, laughing, answering questions, pointing occasionally toward another building. Students listened, trusted, followed. No one seemed concerned. Not yet. A candidate beside me noticed where I was looking. "Busy morning." I nodded. "They seem relaxed." He chuckled. "I wish I were." "So do I." At 8:38, one of the academy attendants hurried across the courtyard, carrying a stack of notices. She approached Maribel's group. Relief crossed several faces. Good. Surely now they'd head toward registration. Instead, the attendant stopped, spoke briefly, looked confused, then continued walking alone. The group stayed exactly where they were. Interesting. Very interesting. 8:43. Still waiting. 8:47. A few students glanced nervously toward the clock tower. One checked a handbook. Another pointed toward the Crystal Hall. Maribel smiled, spoke calmly. The nervous expressions disappeared. My stomach tightened. Control rarely looks dramatic. Sometimes, it looks reassuring. At 8:50, a proctor entered the waiting lounge. "Good morning, candidates." Everyone looked up. "We will begin escorting Hall C in approximately 25 minutes. Quiet nods followed. The proctor smiled. "If you have already completed registration, there is nothing further you need to do." Nothing further. Such ordinary words. Yet hearing them filled me with a peace I'd never known before. Outside, the West Courtyard began to change. Students shifted from relaxed conversation to restless pacing. One cat checked the giant academy clock. Another looked toward the Crystal Hall. Maribel gathered several students into a smaller circle. Speaking, explaining, smiling, always smiling. At 8:53, the first student broke away. A young orange tabby sprinted toward the Crystal Hall. Maribel called after him. He hesitated, stopped, looked back, then returned to the group. My chest tightened. She didn't need authority, only confidence. Beside me, another candidate frowned through the window. What are they doing? I don't know, but I did. They were surrendering responsibility one decision at a time. 8:55. The lounge clock ticked softly. Every sound suddenly seemed louder. Porcelain cups touching saucers. Pages turning. Someone clearing their throat. Outside, several students finally started hurrying toward the crystal hall. Maribel followed, not running, walking briskly, still calm, still composed, as though she knew everything would work out. Then the academy bell rang. One gentle note. 8:57. 3 minutes remained. Students poured across the courtyard. 20, maybe 25 of them. Their orderly walk became hurried steps, then anxious jogging, then running. A flock of pastel uniforms racing toward the entrance. The sight felt painfully familiar. The candidate beside me whispered, "They're late." I looked at the registration display. Still plenty of green names. Still many empty spaces. Time remained. If they registered individually, they could still make it. The front doors opened. Maribel entered first. She approached the registration desk, wearing the same warm smile she'd worn all morning. I couldn't hear the conversation through the glass, but I could read body language. The administrator greeted her politely. Maribel spoke, pointed behind her. The administrator looked past her shoulder, at the crowd, then shook her head. Maribel smiled again. Explain something. The administrator remained calm. Another proctor joined them. Then another. No raised voices. No anger. Just rules. Behind Maribel. The waiting students began talking all at once. Confused. Concerned. A few hurried toward different registration counters. Others remained where they were, apparently expecting further instructions. The orderly line dissolved. 8:58. One nervous student pushed through first and completed registration. Then another. The staff worked quickly, efficiently, professionally, but each candidate still required identity verification. Biometrics. Signatures. There was no shortcut. There never had been. Maribel turned toward the students. Her expression remained encouraging. She gestured for everyone to stay calm. Then, for the first time all morning, I saw uncertainty, not fear. Calculation failing. She glanced toward the giant clock, then toward the registration desks. Then, her eyes lifted, straight to the waiting lounge, straight to me, through the enormous glass window. We looked at one another across the courtyard. She knew. I knew. Neither of us smiled. At that exact moment, the academy clock began striking 9. 1, 2, 3. The sound rolled across Moonpetal Academy like distant thunder. The registration display changed. Every uncleared candidate's name shifted from gray to red. The entrance gates closed with a soft mechanical click. Not dramatic. Not cruel. Simply final. The waiting lounge became completely silent. Outside, dozens of voices erupted at once. And for the second time in my life, I watched the same morning unfold. Only this time, I wasn't standing outside the future. I was already inside it. A little pause before we continue. If you've made it this far, I have a tiny favor to ask. Yes, you, the one who's telling yourself, I'll subscribe after the story ends. We both know there's a 73% chance you'll get distracted by a cat video, a snack, or suddenly remember you were supposed to fold laundry 3 days ago. So, while Maribel is busy explaining why clocks should have waited for her, why not tap subscribe and follow Cats and AI? It helps the channel create more magical stories, just like this one. Besides, you'll officially become one of the clever cats who always rise before the gate closes. Now, let's get back to the story for a long moment. Nobody moved. The academy clock had finished chiming. The registration gates were closed. The green names remained untouched. The red names remained red. Rules, unlike rumors, never argue with anyone. Outside the glass, confusion spread through the courtyard like ripples across a quiet pond. Students crowded around the registration desks. Some pleaded. Others searched desperately through their bags as though an overlooked document might somehow reopen time itself. A few simply stood frozen. Their futures had changed in less than a minute. Maribel did not panic. That was what made her dangerous. She straightened the collar of her pastel blue academy blazer, smoothed a loose curl behind one ear, then approached the chief registrar with the same graceful confidence she carried into every room. Even now, she believed she could talk her way through certainty. From inside the waiting lounge, I couldn't hear every word. But the crystal hall had been designed with high ceilings and polished marble. Voices carried. There's been a misunderstanding. The registrar listened. Our class remained together because we were advised. The registrar interrupted gently. By whom? Maribel hesitated. Only for a heartbeat. I believed, she corrected herself smoothly, that the registration process would begin together. The registrar folded his paws. The handbook states otherwise. I know. So why didn't you report when registration opened? Maribel's smile never disappeared. We were helping another candidate. Helping. The same word that had buried me once before. The registrar looked toward the students gathered behind her. Were all of you helping? Silence. No one answered. One by one, uncertain faces turned toward Maribel, waiting, expecting her to explain, to fix everything. She had spent years teaching them that she always knew what to do. Now, she had nowhere left to lead them. A gray tabby named Rowan stepped forward first. But he looked genuinely confused. You told us registration wasn't urgent. Maribel kept smiling. I said not to worry. You said we'd enter together. I believed that would be possible. Another student frowned. You told us individual registration would make seating unfair. I misunderstood the procedure. Hazel blinked. I asked if we should read the handbook. You said you already confirmed everything. The courtyard grew quieter with every sentence. The chief registrar didn't raise his voice. Instead, he asked a single question. Did any member of staff instruct candidates to delay registration? No. Did any member of staff authorize group processing? No. Were these instructions written anywhere in the handbook? No. He nodded once. Thank you. The simplicity of his questions left no room for decoration. Behind the front desk, another administrator quietly began gathering documents. Incident reports, attendance records, registration logs. Everything was being recorded, not because anyone wanted drama, because examinations depended on records, not memories. One of the academy security officers approached the registrar and spoke softly. The registrar glanced toward the waiting lounge, toward me, then nodded. A moment later, the lounge doors opened. Miss Ashbrook. I stood. Would you come with us, please? Every candidate in the lounge turned to look at me, not with suspicion, with curiosity. The registrar met me near the entrance. Miss Ashbrook. He spoke kindly. We understand you were the reservation holder for the Clocktower Garden this morning. Yes. Were you delayed in arriving for registration? No. What time did you leave the garden? A little after 8 o'clock. And why? Because the handbook said registration opened at 8:15. He made a note. Were you given any different instructions by another student? No. Were you aware that several candidates intended to delay registration? I paused. I became aware while walking through the botanical conservatory. Maribel looked at me for the first time since the gates closed. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes were asking a question. How much do you know? I overheard a conversation. The courtyard became perfectly still. I heard students discussing waiting together before coming to the Crystal Hall. The registrar nodded. Did anyone mention why? Yes. What was said? I answered exactly as I remembered. No one should register until the whole group moved together. A murmur spread through the students. Several exchanged startled glances. Hazel slowly lowered her ears. So, she whispered. It wasn't just me. Maribel finally spoke. Elara. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. You misunderstood. I met her gaze. I don't think I did. You only heard part of the conversation. Perhaps. She stepped forward. I was trying to keep everyone calm. By keeping them away from registration, I believe there was time. You sounded very certain. Silence. The chief registrar looked toward the students. Did anyone here decide independently to delay registration? No paws were raised. Instead, several students looked toward Maribel. Again, the answer spoke for itself. Just then, another figure hurried across the marble floor. Professor Hazel, still carrying the brass key to the Clocktower Garden. He looked slightly out of breath. I've just come from the garden. The registrar nodded. Professor, the reservation was left in perfect condition. He looked toward me. Miss Ashbrook followed every academy regulation. Then his expression changed. However, he held up something small, a folded pastel blue paper. I found this just outside the garden gate. The registrar unfolded it carefully. It was a handwritten note. Not official, not signed, just a single sentence. Wait for everyone. We enter together. The handwriting was neat, elegant, familiar. Several students stared at it. Hazel covered her mouth. I've seen that handwriting before. Rowan whispered. So have I. No one said the name. No one needed to. The registrar placed the note into an evidence folder. Thank you, Professor. He looked at the gathered students. I believe academic integrity will want to speak with everyone involved. No accusations. No speeches. Only procedure. Sometimes, that was far more frightening. Inside the waiting lounge, candidates had begun quietly discussing what they'd witnessed. No one mocked the late students. No one celebrated. The mood felt strangely heavy. Watching someone lose their future is never entertaining, even when they helped create the circumstances themselves. I returned to my seat by the window. Hall C would be called soon. The examination still waited. The reason I had come to the academy in the first place. Outside, Maribel remained standing in the center of the courtyard, not crying, not shouting, simply watching the registration board, the green names, the red names, The consequences neither charm nor confidence could rewrite. For the first time, she looked very small. A soft chime echoed through the lounge. Hall C candidates. The proctor smiled warmly. We're ready for you. I stood, adjusted the strap of my satchel, and walked toward the examination corridor. This time, no one stopped me. No one called my name. No one asked me to wait. Behind me, the courtyard buzzed with the beginning of an investigation. Ahead of me, sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, scattering pastel colors across the marble floor like stepping stones, leading toward tomorrow. And for the first time in 2 lives, I walked forward without looking back. The examination hall was so quiet that even the turning of a single page seemed loud. Rows of polished oak desks stretched beneath vaulted ceilings painted with pastel constellations. Soft morning light filtered through stained glass windows in shades of blush pink, lavender, mint green, and pale blue, laying ribbons of color across the marble floor. Every candidate sat alone. No whispered advice, no hurried conversations, no last-minute bargains. Only the steady rhythm of hundreds of determined hearts. I found seat 18. The small brass number gleamed beneath my fingertips. In my first life, I had imagined this seat thousands of times. I had wondered whether it would feel different from every other desk. Whether sitting here would somehow make me feel worthy. Instead, it simply felt like a chair. And somehow, that made me smile. Candidates. Chief Proctor Alder stood at the front of the hall. A tall silver Maine Coon with kind amber eyes and a voice that never needed to become loud. You have worked for this day for many years. He looked around the room. Everything you need is already with you. A few nervous students chuckled. You may begin. The hall filled with the gentle sound of examination papers opening. The first question was easy. Not because I knew the answer immediately. Because I wasn't panicking. In my previous life, I had never reached this moment. Every nightmare had ended outside the registration gate. Every dream had stopped at the locked doors. Now, there were only questions. And answers. Nothing more. I wrote steadily. History. Ethics. Advanced magical theory. Logical reasoning. Statistical analysis. Each page brought another quiet sense of certainty. Not certainty that I would achieve the highest score. Only certainty that my future would finally belong to my own choices. Halfway through the examination, a memory interrupted me. Not of dying. Not of betrayal. Something much smaller. The morning after I lost everything in my first life. I had walked through the academy gardens alone. Students avoided looking at me. Teachers spoke in whispers. Someone had pinned an anonymous note to my dormitory door. Some students simply aren't meant for greatness. At the time, I believed it. Now, I realized something. No note had ever possessed that power. Only my belief in it had. I lowered my pencil for just a second, then continued writing. Hours seemed to disappear. When the final bell rang, candidates slowly placed their pencils on their desks. No cheers. No applause. Only long breaths. Some smiled. Others looked exhausted. One young tabby stretched so dramatically that several students laughed. The tension melted away like morning mist. Outside the examination hall, academy staff returned every candidate's sealed belongings. My communication crystal chimed the moment it was activated. 32 unread messages. 21 missed calls. 112 messages in the senior class discussion. I didn't open any of them. Not yet. As I stepped into the courtyard, Professor Hazel approached me. Miss Ashbrook. Professor. He offered a gentle smile. You handled yourself well this morning. I only followed the handbook. He laughed. I've spent 23 years telling students to read it. He adjusted his spectacles. You may be the first one who actually did. Before I could answer, another professor hurried across the courtyard. Professor Hazel. What is it? The headmistress would like both of you in the integrity office. Professor Hazel looked surprised. So soon? I'm afraid it's urgent. He turned to me. Miss Ashbrook. I believe your day isn't over yet. The Academy Integrity Office occupied the oldest building on campus. Unlike the elegant classrooms and colorful courtyards, this wing was simple. Cream-colored walls, dark wooden furniture, tall windows overlooking the eastern gardens. No decorations except the Academy crest mounted above the entrance. It wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to record the truth. Inside the conference room sat 6 faculty members. Headmistress Rowan, Chief Proctor Alder, the Registrar, Professor Hazel, 2 members of the Academic Integrity Council. On the opposite side, Maribel. She still looked immaculate, her uniform perfectly pressed, her ribbons neatly tied. Only the faint shadows beneath her eyes suggested the morning hadn't gone according to plan. Miss Ashbrook. The headmistress smiled warmly. Thank you for coming. I nodded. You are not here because you're in trouble. I understand. We simply wish to establish a complete timeline. She folded her paws. The Academy prefers facts before conclusions. I appreciated that. Facts had never betrayed me. The registrar projected a campus map onto the wall. A tiny golden line marked my movements. Clocktower Garden, Botanical Conservatory, Crystal Hall, registration, waiting lounge. Examination hall. Every location matched the security recordings. Every timestamp matched the registration logs. Everything fit perfectly. Then, a second golden line appeared. Maribel's. The room grew noticeably quieter. Her route looked odd. She had never gone directly toward registration. Instead, she had circled through 3 separate courtyards, stopped near the West Fountain, visited the student pavilion, returned to the maple trees. Only then had she approached the Crystal Hall. Nearly 40 minutes after registration opened, Headmistress Rowan leaned forward. Miss Wren, can you explain why your route differed so significantly from the recommended examination path? Maribel answered calmly. I was helping anxious classmates remain calm. Were you instructed to do so by a member of staff? No. Were you appointed to organize candidate movement? No. Then why assume that responsibility? Maribel hesitated. I thought. She stopped, then quietly admitted. I thought I was helping. The room remained silent, not because anyone believed the matter was finished, because something still didn't fit. Helping didn't explain the handwritten note. It didn't explain the conversation Elara overheard. And it certainly didn't explain why nearly 30 students had trusted Maribel over the Academy handbook. Chief Proctor Alder folded his paws. There is still one question we have not answered. Everyone looked toward him. Why did so many students believe you? Maribel lowered her eyes. For the first time all day, she didn't have an immediate answer. And somehow, that silence felt far more important than any excuse she could have offered. The conference room remained perfectly still. Outside, pastel leaves drifted lazily across the Academy courtyard, and somewhere in the distance the clock tower chimed the half-hour. Inside, no one spoke, not because they had run out of questions, because everyone was waiting for the same answer. Chief Proctor Alder folded his paws on the polished oak table. Miss Wren, his voice remained calm. Why did 28 final-year candidates trust your instructions over the Academy handbook? Maribel looked at the tabletop. For several long seconds, she didn't answer. Then, she smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was tired. You teach us to become leaders. She looked toward the faculty. So they follow their leader. No one interrupted. The Student Harmony Council, she continued quietly, exists to help students. Headmistress Rowan nodded once. It does. I've chaired it for 3 years. Yes. So students naturally asked me what to do. Chief Proctor Alder leaned back slightly. And what did you tell them? Maribel met his eyes. I told them to stay together. Why? Because I believed it would prevent panic. Professor Hazel frowned. Prevent panic, he repeated thoughtfully. Or prevent competition? Maribel's expression changed. Only slightly. But I noticed. The headmistress noticed too. What do you mean, Professor? He adjusted his glasses. I've taught graduating classes for nearly 25 years. He looked around the room. Students don't suddenly abandon examination rules. He turned toward Maribel. They abandon them when they think they'll gain something. Silence. Chief Proctor Alder nodded slowly. An interesting observation. He reached toward a small remote. The projector changed. Instead of campus maps, a copy of the Student Harmony Council newsletter appeared on the screen. Bright pastel colors, smiling photographs, community events, volunteer schedules, perfectly ordinary, until Professor Hazel enlarged one section. Near the bottom, a small announcement, final year leadership recognition. Students demonstrating exceptional cooperation during examination week may receive recommendations for future leadership opportunities. The room became quiet again. I had seen that announcement before. In my first life, I thought nothing of it. Today, I looked more carefully. There was no official academy seal, no registrar's signature, no approval from academic affairs. Only the Student Harmony Council logo. Chief Proctor Alder looked at Maribel. Did academic affairs authorize this announcement? No. Did the academy? No. Who wrote it? Maribel answered almost too softly to hear. I did. A council member flipped through several printed pages. We've already confirmed that no such recommendation program exists. Another faculty member added, there has never been an examination week leadership award. Several students had believed one did, because Maribel told them. Headmistress Rowan sighed quietly. So, she said gently, students delayed registration because they believed remaining together demonstrated leadership. Maribel nodded once. I thought. She stopped herself, then tried again. I thought unity would impress the faculty. Chief Proctor Alder tilted his head, and separating to register early looked selfish. The words hung in the air. Suddenly, everything made sense. In my first life, when I left the Clocktower Garden to register, students accused me of abandoning everyone. Not because they hated me, because they genuinely believed staying together mattered more. Someone had taught them that. Professor Hazel spoke quietly. The garden wasn't the objective. Everyone turned toward him. It never was. He looked at me. The reservation holder simply became the example. Then toward Maribel. If Miss Ashbrook stayed, the others stayed. If she left, they would question your instructions. Maribel closed her eyes. Just for a moment. She didn't deny it. The headmistress remained remarkably composed. So, she said, you encouraged candidates to remain together. Because if Elara chose registration instead, your authority disappeared. Maribel whispered. Yes. No one celebrated the confession. No dramatic music played. No gasps filled the room. Only quiet disappointment. Sometimes, truth arrives too gently to sound victorious. Then the registrar cleared his throat. There is one final matter. He slid a small silver memory crystal onto the table. Everyone looked at it. The Academy installed new observation crystals this term. Professor Hazel blinked. I wasn't aware. They're unobtrusive. The registrar nodded. They record movement in public areas for campus safety. Maribel's ears lowered. Very slightly. Chief Proctor Alder picked up the crystal. This recording comes from the west courtyard. He placed it into the projector. Soft blue light filled the room. The image sharpened. There, beneath the flowering maple trees, was Maribel, surrounded by nearly 30 students. No audio, only pictures. But sometimes, pictures were enough. The crystal showed students asking questions. Maribel answering, pointing toward the academy clock, gesturing for everyone to remain together, repeatedly checking the pathways leading from the Clocktower Garden. Waiting. For me. The recording continued. Students became restless. Several pointed toward the crystal hall. One orange tabby started walking away. Maribel gently placed a paw on his shoulder. She smiled, said something. He nodded, and returned. Another student checked the handbook. Maribel shook her head reassuringly. The handbook closed. The student smiled again. No one in the conference room spoke. The evidence required no narration. Finally, the recording reached 8:55. Students began panicking. Maribel pointed toward the crystal hall. The entire group ran. Exactly together. Exactly as planned. Exactly too late. The projection faded. Chief Proctor Alder quietly removed the memory crystal. I believe, he said softly. We now understand what happened. No accusation. No anger. Just certainty. Maribel stared at the dark projector screen. I never wanted anyone to miss the examination. Her voice cracked for the first time. I only wanted, she swallowed, to prove I deserved to lead. Headmistress Rowan looked genuinely saddened. The tragedy, she replied gently, is that true leaders never need to prove they are being followed. The room fell silent once more. Outside the tall windows, the afternoon sun painted the academy gardens in warm pastel gold. Inside, the investigation was no longer searching for answers. It was preparing for consequences. The hearing was scheduled for Monday. Moonpetal Academy had a simple rule. No disciplinary decision was made on the same day emotions ran highest. Faculty believed anger made poor records. Facts aged better over a weekend. By Monday morning, the entire campus had changed. Students still crossed the pastel bridges. Classes still began with the ringing of the silver clock tower. The bakery beside the east courtyard still sold warm honey rolls before sunrise. Everything looked normal. Only now, conversations stopped whenever I walked past. Not because I was being blamed. Because no one quite knew where the truth had settled. Rumors had already grown larger than reality. Some claimed the examination would be cancelled. Others insisted the graduating class would have to repeat the entire year. One ridiculous story suggested the Clocktower Garden had been permanently closed because it was haunted. That one somehow became the most popular. I ignored every rumor. Rumors had ruined my first life. Records had saved my second. The Academy Integrity Chamber occupied the oldest building on campus. Unlike the cheerful classrooms painted in pastel colors, the chamber was quiet and understated. Cream-colored stone walls, tall arched windows, simple wooden benches, no banners, no awards. Truth didn't need decoration. Students entered one row at a time. Nearly every final year candidate attended, some because they had been involved, others because they wanted answers. No one spoke above a whisper. Maribel arrived with her parents. Her mother was an elegant cream Persian cat dressed in soft blue. Her father, a broad-shouldered silver cat with gentle eyes, carried a folder so tightly his knuckles had turned pale beneath his fur. Neither looked angry, only worried. When Maribel noticed me, she didn't smile. She simply nodded once. I returned the gesture. Whatever happened today, neither hatred nor revenge would improve it. At precisely 9 o'clock, Headmistress Rowan entered. Every student stood. Please be seated. The chamber settled into complete silence. The purpose of today's hearing, her calm voice echoed gently across the room, is not punishment. Several students looked surprised. It is clarification. She looked around the chamber. Punishment without understanding teaches fear. Understanding teaches responsibility. Chief Proctor Alder activated the large display behind him. Instead of accusations, A timeline appeared. Simple. Objective. Every verified event from examination morning. 7:12, Clocktower Garden opened. 7:24, reservation holder entered. 7:31, first student approached the garden. 8:04, reservation holder departed. 8:20, group assembled in the west courtyard. 8:31, Elara Ashbrook completed registration. 8:57, group arrived at Crystal Hall. 9 o'clock, registration closed. No opinions. No assumptions. Only timestamps supported by academy records. Headmistress Rowan looked toward the students. If any candidate believes this timeline is inaccurate, she paused. This is the opportunity to say so. No one spoke. The timeline will therefore be accepted. A quiet note was added to the official record. Then came the witness statements. Not dramatic speeches. Simple questions. Simple answers. Hazel Fern stepped forward first. She looked exhausted. I'd like to apologize. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the faculty. I read the handbook. A few students exchanged confused glances. Hazel continued. I read it the week before the examination. Chief Proctor Alder raised an eyebrow. You did? Yes. Then why didn't you follow it? Hazel lowered her ears. Because, she took a shaky breath. I believe Maribel knew something the handbook didn't. The room became very quiet. Professor Hazel spoke gently. So you trusted a student? More than written academy policy? Hazel nodded. Yes. Why? She answered almost immediately. Because she had always been right before. No one criticized her. Everyone understood. Trust is rarely lost all at once. It's built carefully, then borrowed recklessly. Next came Rowan Bell, the orange tabby I had seen trying to leave the west courtyard. He looked embarrassed. I actually started walking toward registration. Chief Proctor Alder nodded. We know. I only turned around because Maribel said we'd be seated together if we waited. Were you worried? Very. So why return? Rowan looked down. I didn't want everyone thinking I only cared about myself. Those words settled heavily across the chamber. Not because they were unusual. Because they explained everything. One after another, students told remarkably similar stories. I thought staying together showed teamwork. I assumed Maribel had official information. I didn't want to look selfish. I thought early registration would make everyone else angry. Not one student mentioned the Clocktower Garden. Not one. The garden had never mattered. Only perception had. Finally, Headmistress Rowan called my name. Miss Ashbrook. I stood, walked calmly to the front. The room watched quietly. You've already provided a written statement. Yes. We have only one additional question. She smiled kindly. When you left the Clocktower Garden, why didn't you try convincing the others to register? The question surprised me. In my first life, that was exactly what I had done. I looked around the room, at familiar faces, some ashamed, some confused, some quietly crying. Then I answered honestly. Because, I smiled gently. I realized people only accept advice when they're ready to question certainty. Several professors exchanged thoughtful glances. I could have argued. I continued. I could have shouted. I could have begged. It wouldn't have mattered. Not while everyone believed someone else had better information. The chamber remained silent. I chose to follow the handbook, and hoped others would too. Chief Proctor Alder nodded slowly. Thank you. As I returned to my seat, I noticed Maribel watching me. Not angrily. Not sadly. Almost. Curiously. As though she were trying to understand something she had overlooked. The final witness was unexpected. Professor Hazel. He carried a thin leather folder. I have one final document. The headmistress looked surprised. I wasn't aware. Neither was I. He smiled faintly. I found it while preparing archive materials yesterday. He carefully opened the folder. Inside was last year's Academy Integrity Report. He turned several pages, then stopped. There. The registrar leaned forward. His eyes widened. So, he whispered. It happened before. A murmur spread through the chamber. Professor Hazel nodded. Not exactly the same, but similar. He looked toward everyone. Last year, another group of students delayed registration. Complete silence. They were convinced by another student that arriving together demonstrated leadership. Every eye slowly turned toward Maribel. Professor Hazel shook his head. Not Miss Wren. Everyone blinked. It was someone else. He closed the folder. The academy corrected the misunderstanding immediately. The policy was rewritten. The handbook was updated. He looked around the room. And yet, his expression became thoughtful. Very few students actually read it. The realization settled over the chamber like a quiet snowfall. This hadn't begun with Maribel. She had simply repeated a mistake that someone else had once made, believing she could control it better. She couldn't, and neither had the student before her. The room fell silent again. For the first time, the hearing wasn't only about one student's decisions. It was about how easily confidence could become authority, when no one paused to verify the truth for themselves. The hearing ended just before noon. No decision was announced. Not yet. Moonpetal Academy had another tradition. Evidence was presented publicly. Deliberation happened privately. Justice, the headmistress often said, should never become a performance. Students filed quietly out of the integrity chamber. Nobody rushed. Nobody argued. Even those who had arrived expecting drama seemed strangely thoughtful. Conversations were quieter than usual, not because anyone had been silenced, because everyone had realized how easily certainty could borrow the voice of kindness. I stepped outside into the spring sunshine. Cherry blossoms drifted through the air, collecting along the stone paths like soft pink snow. For the first time in 2 lives, I felt tired, not exhausted, simply finished, as though I had finally stopped carrying something that no longer belonged to me. Elara! I stopped. Maribel stood several steps behind me. She wasn't surrounded by classmates anymore. No admirers, no student council members, no circle waiting for instructions. Just one cat, standing alone. May we talk? I considered the question, then nodded. There are benches near the lily pond. Neither of us spoke while we walked. The pond reflected pale blue skies broken only by drifting white clouds. Tiny golden fish swam lazily beneath floating lilies. Everything around us felt impossibly peaceful. Maribel sat first. For several moments, she watched the water instead of me. Finally, she laughed. It wasn't joyful, only tired. I've been trying to understand something. What? You. I waited. You weren't angry. She looked genuinely confused. When I came to the garden, when everyone surrounded you, when you heard us in the west courtyard, you never shouted. No. You never tried exposing me. No. You never even argued. I smiled faintly. I used to. She turned toward me. What changed? The truthful answer. I remembered another life. Could never be spoken. So I answered with the closest truth I could give. I realized something. What? Some battles become unwinnable the moment you start fighting the wrong one. She frowned. I don't understand. You thought the garden mattered. It didn't. You thought everyone needed convincing. They didn't. You believed authority came from being followed. It doesn't. I looked across the pond. The only thing that mattered was arriving where I was supposed to be. Maribel lowered her eyes. I kept waiting for you. I know. I thought if you stayed, everyone else would stay. You were right. She looked surprised. I was. In my first life. The words almost escaped before I caught them. I corrected myself. I probably would have. She nodded slowly. I spent months planning examination week. That surprised me. Months. She laughed bitterly. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I know. I wanted our graduating class remembered. She picked up a small pebble and rolled it between her paws. Every year the Harmony Council organizes something. A charity project. A mentoring week. A graduation celebration. This year. She smiled sadly. I wanted perfect unity. Perfect unity. The phrase sounded beautiful. Until it demanded perfect obedience. I thought. Maribel whispered. If everyone trusted me enough to move together, the faculty would finally see I deserved to become academy captain. There it was. Not jealousy. Not revenge. Recognition. She had mistaken influence for leadership. I never cared about the garden. She looked toward me. I cared about what it represented. What? You. I blinked. You were the one student everyone respected without trying. I wasn't. You were. She shook her head gently. Professors trusted you. Students copied your notes. First years asked you for advice. You never noticed. I remembered countless small moments. Sharing study guides. Helping younger students after class. Explaining difficult formulas. I had never considered any of them important. You made people feel safe. Maribel continued. I made people admire me. She smiled sadly. I thought those were the same thing. The breeze carried a handful of cherry blossoms across the pond. Neither of us spoke. Sometimes, silence allows understanding to arrive before words do. Finally Maribel stood. I don't expect forgiveness. I wasn't going to ask for it. She nodded. I know. She took a slow breath. I've spent years believing leadership meant always having the answers. She looked toward the distant academy clock tower. Now I think. It might begin with admitting when you don't. Before leaving, she reached into her satchel. There was something else. She handed me a folded envelope. I found this while cleaning my desk. I looked at the handwriting. It wasn't hers. It wasn't mine. Inside was an anonymous letter, yellowed slightly with age. The date in the corner stopped my breath. 1 year before my first life ended. The note read, to whoever becomes next year's Harmony Council chair. Never let the graduating class scatter during examination week. If everyone stays together, the faculty notices your leadership. Trust me, it works. No signature. No academy seal. Nothing. Just anonymous advice. I looked up. Where did you find this? In the Harmony Council records. It was tucked inside the transition folder. You followed it. She nodded once. I assumed the previous chair left guidance. Weren't you curious who wrote it? I should have been. A strange feeling settled over me. Not relief. Not anger. Understanding. The lie that destroyed my first life hadn't begun with Maribel. Someone before her had believed the same false lesson, then quietly passed it forward, like an heirloom no one questioned. Maribel turned to leave. After several steps, she stopped. Without looking back, she asked, "Do you think people can become different?" I watched a blossom drift onto the surface of the pond. It depends. On what? Whether they want to become someone new, or simply someone forgiven. She stood silently for a long moment, then walked away. This time, she didn't ask anyone to follow her. I remained beside the pond long after she disappeared, watching the ripples spread across the water, watching them slowly fade. For the first time, I understood something my second life had been trying to teach me all along. Not every cycle is broken by defeating the person standing in front of you. Sometimes, it's broken by refusing to inherit the mistake they were handed. And somewhere inside the Academy archives, I had the feeling another answer was still waiting. One older than Maribel, older than the anonymous letter, older than my first life itself. Tuesday morning arrived beneath a sky painted in soft shades of peach and lavender. The rain from the weekend had washed every rooftop clean, and Moonpetal Academy looked as though someone had carefully polished every stone by hand. Students gathered quietly beneath the central clock tower, not because classes had begun, because the Academy board was about to release its decision. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even the first-year students sensed something important was happening. At exactly 10 o'clock, the great bronze doors of the administration hall opened. Headmistress Rowan stepped onto the marble balcony. Chief Proctor Alder stood beside her. So did the registrar, Professor Hazel, and every member of the Academic Integrity Council. The headmistress unfolded a single sheet of paper. It wasn't very long. Justice rarely needed many words. Students of Moonpetal Academy. Her voice carried gently across the courtyard. The Academic Integrity Council has completed its review of the Examination Week incident. Every eye lifted toward the balcony. Our findings are as follows. The examination itself will remain valid. A quiet breath of relief spread through the crowd. Candidates who completed registration, according to published Academy policy, will retain their examination eligibility. Another pause. Candidates who failed to complete registration before the official deadline will not receive a special examination sitting. Several students lowered their heads. Not in surprise. They had expected this. The council further concludes that the delay resulted from unauthorized student guidance that directly contradicted Academy policy. The courtyard became perfectly still. Miss Maribel Wren. Maribel stood calmly near the front. You are hereby removed from all student leadership positions effective immediately. She nodded once. No argument. No tears. The Student Harmony Council will be dissolved for the remainder of the academic year, pending structural review. A ripple of surprise spread through the students. No one had expected that. The Academy also recognizes that this incident reflects institutional oversight. That sentence caught everyone's attention. Headmistress Rowan looked across the courtyard. We relied too heavily upon tradition. We assumed students would read official guidance. We assumed unofficial advice would naturally be questioned. She smiled sadly. We were mistaken. Beginning next term, every graduating candidate would attend a mandatory examination briefing conducted only by Academy staff. No unofficial guidance. No student interpreters. No assumptions. Only verified information. Sometimes, the greatest lesson changes the institution itself. The headmistress folded the paper. There is one final matter. She looked toward the registrar. He carried forward a small wooden box. Inside lay an old silver Academy badge. Its enamel had faded with time. During our investigation, the headmistress continued, Professor Hazel uncovered historical records dating back almost 20 years. 20 years. Students exchanged puzzled looks. Professor Hazel opened a weathered archive book. Its pages had yellowed with age. We traced the anonymous letter found in the Harmony Council files. He carefully turned another page. It was not anonymous. He lifted a faded photograph. The picture showed a graduating class from nearly 2 decades earlier, standing proudly in pastel uniforms, smiling beneath the same clock tower. Professor Hazel pointed toward one student, a cheerful-looking calico cat wearing the Harmony Council badge. Her name was Celestine Holloway. A murmur spread across the courtyard. Miss Holloway served as Harmony Council chair during her graduating year. Professor Hazel continued. She encouraged her classmates to remain together before registration. The students listened silently. The result, he sighed softly, was almost identical. Several candidates missed registration. Confusion spread. Friendships fractured. But there was one difference. Everyone waited. Miss Holloway immediately admitted her mistake. The courtyard remained silent. She personally requested that the Academy rewrite the examination handbook so the misunderstanding could never happen again. Professor Hazel closed the archive. That revised handbook, He smiled gently. Was the very handbook Miss Ashbrook chose to read. I stared at the old photograph. So, the warning had existed all along. Not because the academy wanted rules. Because someone else's painful mistake had become tomorrow's protection. The headmistress looked toward the graduating class. History repeats itself, only when lessons are forgotten. After the announcement, students slowly dispersed. Not with excitement, with reflection. Groups that once clustered around popularity now seemed strangely mixed. First years spoke with seniors. Top-ranked students chatted quietly beside those who had struggled all semester. Something subtle had shifted. No one wanted another invisible hierarchy. As I crossed the courtyard, someone called my name. Miss Ashbrook. I turned. Professor Hazel smiled warmly. There is something the faculty wishes to offer you. I don't understand. He held out a cream-colored envelope sealed with the academy crest. This is not a reward. He chuckled. It is recognition. Inside was a handwritten letter. To Miss Elara Ashbrook. During the events of examination week, you demonstrated calm judgment, respect for academy policy, and consideration for your fellow students without seeking recognition. Leadership is measured not by the number of followers behind you, but by the integrity of the path you choose to walk. Should you wish to accept, the faculty would be honored to invite you to mentor next year's graduating candidates during examination preparation. No speeches, no titles, simply guidance. Moonpetal Academy Faculty Council. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. In my first life, I would have accepted immediately. This time, I smiled. I'd like to think about it. Professor Hazel's eyes twinkled. That answer tells me you're already considering the responsibility. As he walked away, I looked toward the Clocktower Garden one last time. The brass key had already been removed. The gate stood open. Students wandered through freely, chatting quietly beneath the willow tree. No reservations, no velvet ropes, no prize worth fighting over. Just another peaceful corner of the academy, exactly as it should have been. I realized then, the garden had never changed. The clock had never changed. The academy had never truly changed. Only the choices made within them had. And perhaps, that was true of people, too. Not everyone was given a second life, but everyone, every single morning, was given another choice. I smiled to myself and stepped onto the stone path, leading away from the courtyard. The future no longer waited behind locked gates. It walked beside me, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of where it would lead. The end.